Welcome to our LinkedIn Live. My name is Anastassia Negrouk, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of MyData-TRUST. Today, we will be speaking about the CRO Code of Conduct. So this Code of Conduct was developed by the European Federation of CROs, and it has been approved by CNIL on the 12th of September of this year. It's a pan-European Code of Conduct, which has been shaped by all 27 member states. According to EDPB, this code clarifies CRO's GDPR obligations, promotes best practices, and advance data protection standards in clinical research. It will be EU third transnational code, and it's expected to be very soon visible in the EDPB database. Today, we are very lucky to have with us Yoani Matsakis, who is a member of the executive board of the EUCROF and the board member of CRO, and who has led the development of the CRO Code of Conduct on behalf of the EUCROF. So thank you for being with us, Yoani. And without further waiting, we will be jumping in questions that I'm pretty sure that the audience is so impatient to hear. So the first question that I would very much like to ask you is, what were the first motivations and the primary motivations for creating a specific GDPR Code of Conduct for CROs?
Well, first of all, let me just say that thank you for MyData-TRUST to inviting us to this live chat. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. When we started this initiative in 2017, before GDPR came into force, our motivation is that, first of all, we saw that within GDPR, there were some innovative rules, Articles 40 and 41, and you could add also 42 for certifications, but 40 and 41 were providing provisions for the establishment of code of conducts by entities which are experts in their domains and in relation with data which are sensible data. So this has to do with Article 9 of the GDPR. Health data, as you know, are normally forgiven to be collected, but obviously for clinical research we have to. And this interplay between the regulations applying to the clinical research and GDPR had to be clarified. Many CROs at that time were not having a clear view of how should they implement GDPR. This has been our primary motivation. And EUCROF, as European CRO Federation, including more than 450 service providers of all sizes, was a legitimate body that has been quickly recognized by the data protection authorities. These have been the initial motivations. So the other ones is that CROs, service providers, they bear a pivotal role between the different actors involved in clinical research, and notably between sponsors, investigational sites, supervisories, authorities, patients, etc. And another motivation is that is written in Articles 40 and 41 that makes it an obligation to the data protection authorities of the countries to enter into those procedures with Code of Conduct, is that a considerable amount of CROs are micro, small, and medium-sized companies. We have large companies, and we have very different companies of much smaller size. So all these altogether are the conditions that were specifically described in Articles 40 and 41 of GDPR for motivating the establishment of Code of Conducts. So I think, in a nutshell, these were the reasons why we entered into this initiative.
So it's seen as an opportunity to create a sector-specific framework, which would be eventually beneficial for innovation and the sector itself.
Absolutely, yes, and for all types of companies.
Mm-hmm. So who were the key stakeholders, and what were some of the biggest challenges on your way through?
Stakeholders are all the stakeholders of clinical research, of course, starting with sponsors, as I mentioned already, but all types of sponsors, biotechs, medtechs, large pharma, smaller pharma, academic sponsors, all the sponsor domain. And then the patients at every meeting we have at the stakeholders meeting at EMA, we face patients and they are asking, how can we exercise in practice our rights? And then, of course, we have the investigational sites and the other CRO associations worldwide, like EUCROF, for instance. So these have been the stakeholders with which we've been interacting throughout this whole process that started back in 2017 and that ended in September 12 with the final approval of the code. These are the stakeholders. But now, of course, around behind the stakeholders, and if we want to answer to what were the biggest challenges, the biggest challenges have been that, first of all, this is the first. It is a first in this domain. The Code of Conduct for Service Providers is the first in the health area with a transnational scope, the 27 data protection EU authorities. Within Articles 40 and 41, there are provisions that are encouraging and make it mandatory to establish a collaborative and harmonization process. I think this has been one of the challenges we had through the lead data protection authority, which has been CNIL, the French data protection authorities. We had interactions with all the 27 data protection authorities across Europe. And these interactions have taken time. And add to that the fact that it was the first exercise of this type, this has added a bit more. The other challenges is of course, that we had also to have other interactions with the FPIA, with the other stakeholders. And so this has made the process a bit long, as it was a first, and as we had to coordinate with many other entities.
So the main challenge was actually to reach consensus on different questions and topics all the way down with different stakeholders, right?
Thank you for summarizing so clearly. Yes, Anastassia, this has been one of the key challenges. There were more than that. I mentioned small sized companies and large companies. They have different interests. We had to find a way to provide a good answer to every of them. And this has been one of the innovations that have been recognized by the data protection authorities, is that we've been able to provide an innovative model on how to organize that. This has been, yes, really one of the things that I have heard from the data protection authorities several times. The other element which has been very much appreciated by the data protection authorities is that we have also addressed the issue of cybersecurity. You cannot speak of data protection if you don't speak of cybersecurity. And we did that also in this code. This has been another challenge that we had to face.
So where do we stand today?
Today, the code is final. Go to the website of EUCROF. There is a specific section on the website, and you can ask to download the document of the code. These are final and approved. And you have the all the 217 requirements which are listed in French and in English, with the recommendations on how to comply with each of them. So this is something you can download now. Just go on the website of EUCROF. The challenge we have now, the next one, is that we have to establish the monitoring body, and this monitoring body has to be accredited by the lead data protection authority, CNIL. So we are, I would say, 80% the way done of this work, and we expect that we will be able to start with analyzing adherence dossier in the course of the first quarter of 25. The earlier, the better. I don't know exactly when this will happen, but that's what we are. That's where we are, if you want. Yeah.
Thank you. So you already mentioned the cybersecurity, and indeed it's a very important addition because GDPR itself is very vague on it. Obviously, it's one of the main principles, but then it says basically that processors shall provide sufficient guarantees, which is a very subjective notion. So what specific provisions you can speak about which make the code different from the GDPR itself, and like what elements of GDPR the code explicit a little bit further?
So the Code of Conduct, as it focuses on service providers and their contractual relationship with the sponsors, and the specific conditions where the sponsor acts as a controller, and the provider acts as a processor. So I mentioned that there are 217 requirements. Of those 217, 92 are specific to the clinical research area. These are the requirements that have been drafted directly by for the specific area of clinical research. 113 are taken from ISO 27001, and they require that every adhering company upgrades its quality management system into a quality and information security management system. And this is, as I mentioned already, one of the aspects which have been very much appreciated by also the data protection authorities. From the 92 requirements, which are dealing directly with the research area and the contractual relationship, they are distributed in 18 domains, going from data transfers to third countries, to data processing clauses to service contracts, data processing agreement with subcontractors, confidentiality obligations, instructions from the controllers, etc. So data minimization, data accuracy, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality. You understand designation of a data protection officer, etc. So you understand that for all these areas, you have the specific requirements which are derived from the clinical research domain, plus a mandatory set and a selected set of requirements that have to do with security per se. Do not security and data protection are two, I would say, two pillars of what at the end will provide a reliable environment for data protection per se. So this is the difference between those things. They are very much close, each of them, and they are playing together to provide the level of trust and confidence which we are trying to achieve through the implementation of the code and through the adherence of service providers.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that one of the added values of the code was the fact that the code considers that not every organization is a big CRO, that there are all sizes of CRO. We actually have a question from the audience. So on this question, you already partially replied, because it says, does the code of conduct consider the differences in resources and capabilities between large and small CROs, and provide scalable guideline to ensure compliance is achievable for all? So maybe you can give an example of how the code basically accommodates to the fact on like what provisions are there to accommodate to smaller and bigger organizations.
Yeah, so the primary aspect is that for every CRO, every service provider, let's use this wider term maybe, you have to look at what we call the statement of applicability. So the code has defined 23 classes of services, which by class of service, we say, for instance, data management is a class of service. Biostatistics is another, or statistics report is another one, just to give you some examples. So hosting of an information system is a third one, etc. We have 23 classes of services that have been defined. They are all in the code. Again, you can download the code from EUCROF website, and you can have the access to this whole list. Depending on the services which you are providing, then we have mapped the requirements which are applicable in relation with every of those services. So a smaller CRO who would be, for instance, focused on monitoring services, or I don't know, EDC or electronic data capture, of course, you will have to comply only with those requirements which are connected with the service which you are delivering. That's the first way where the code enables scalability depending on the profile of your company.
Thank you. So beyond what the EDPB thinks about the added value of the code, so what from your perspective are added value of the code?
As we said, added value of the code is it's you know, not one fits all. First of all, that is what we've mentioned, but Most of it is that now you'll be listed on the public registry as an adherent companies. You'll be acknowledged by all the other stakeholders as providing a trusted, let's say, compliance scheme with GDPR on the domain of clinical research. And we think that it will make it easier for you to be selected by the sponsor, to be accepted by the investigational sites with which you will have to interact to be, you see, that's the main advantage that I see with the code.
Okay, thank you.
For CRO, maybe just to add to this one point, sorry, Anastassia, to interrupt you. Of course, all of you, know what it is a vendor assessment. You are probably, the more clients you have, the more vendor assessments you're going to go through. Both for those who are obliged to implement those vendor assessments and the vendors themselves, this is a real burden. You have the same questions asked in different ways by many other companies. So one of the advantages that we are expecting is for every one of you is that once you have complied with the code, you get a compliance mark, which is public, which you are entitled to display in every of your documents, and on which your clients can rely. So it should reduce the burden of those vendor assessment. At least that's one of the objectives which we are pursuing.
Yeah, and also I agree with you, and also the subjectivity of the sufficient guarantees, because the additional complexity today is that every sponsor may come with their own exigencies, and so it's a little bit difficult to adapt it each time. So for a CRO that already have GDPR measures in place, what additional steps will they need to take? And I would like to kind of combine it with a question from the audience. Is the ISO 27001 certification required as per se?
ISO 27001 is not required. A certification is not required. What you need is to have the measures, organizational and technical measures in place to demonstrate compliance with the requirements of the ISO 27001, which are listed in the code. That's all what you need. You don't need to be certified. Of course, if you are certified, the adherence process is going to be easier. That's obvious. Yes. Otherwise, every CRO, every organization in Europe anyway, has today to be compliant with GDPR. We know that there are still so many ways of implementing GDPR. The code is providing a unique way of looking at it, simplified in that harmonized way, recognized by the 27 data protection authorities, as we already said. And it provides a list of requirements with guidance on the measures to be implemented to comply with each of the requirements. So what you need to do is download the documents of the code from the website and start to make a gap analysis of the points where you have opportunities for improvement, I think. And from that point, then you will be very close to be ready to deposit your candidacy for adherence dossier.
So thank you. And speaking about the adherence dossier, so how the adherence process will work?
You prepare your dossier based on the list of the requirements, as I mentioned before, including the supporting documentation. And this whole dossier will be submitted to the monitoring body, so-called COSU, at this point in time. You can do that online through the CRO platform of which is available online from EUCROF website. This documentation will be analyzed by the monitoring, the governance body. They may have questions for you, and if everything is considered as compliant, then you'll get a formal answer from the monitoring body for your compliance, and you will be entitled to bear the first compliance mark, which is the mark that is called, let me just check the right word for this. Yes, it's the declarative adherence dossier. So it may take more than weeks before you get this answer. There may be questions. There may be requirements for to provide additional information. But that's the way you will do it online. Then the second level, if you apply for it, it's going to go with an audit, inside audit of your documentation, of the way you maintain your adherence process. The adherence is valid for 3 years, and it is following the model of ISO 9001, with which all of you are used, I think. So you have an initial adherence, and then you have a renewal every year, where all the opportunities for improvement will be reviewed every year. And every 3 years, you have a renewal audit in this case, and you have to reassess the whole file.
Okay, thank you. So you have been saying that the monitoring body is still being put in place. So at this stage, what the CROs can actually already do?
What the CRO can already do is start to register on the CRO platform. Because why? Because the COSUP, when it will start its operation, will have many files to process, and they cannot be all done at once, because this will be very seriously looked at. So it's based on the first in, first served, being listed on the public registry already, not yet with a compliance mark, but at least as an engaged party. And with this, you will take a rank in the list of adherence files. You can follow the instructions from the EUCROF website, and if you need some support, the secretariat of EUCROF is here to help you. Hello?
Yeah, thank you. So we have some more questions from the audience. Does the Code of Conduct consider the differences in the national requirements? So many clinical trials are global clinical trials. So how does the Code of Conduct address the GDPR compliance challenges in a global context?
As we mentioned, maybe Anastassia, you can help you with this answer. We can discuss that among us. But the Code of Conduct is already acknowledged by the 27 data protection authorities. So at least in Europe, it will cover the 27 EU member states and the 27 national regulations. Of course, there may be some specific additional regulations in some countries. Was that your question?
That's probably the question from the audience. I think the audience probably points also on the transfers and the global context. So is this code already able to help us with transfers?
So we already have discussions with the UK to generate a UK-specific code that will be very close to this one. We had some representative of UK anyway in our international task force, so we have maintained the communication with UK all through the process. About transfers, this has been one of the subjects that we discussed intensively with the data protection authorities. At this point in time, when we were finalizing the text of the code, all the 27 EU member states had not yet formed a consensus on transfers. So we have provisions for transfers, but the code itself cannot be used as a tool for transfers, as you know, as it is possible to do that. This will come, the code again is a living material. This will come with the next releases of the code, most probably.
Okay, so we have another question. How does the code ensure transparency and accountability in the handling of patient data, and what measures are in place to protect patient privacy while facilitating clinical research? Transparency question.
Yeah, sure. The principles which are in GDPR, of course, apply. For instance, data minimization. When you set up your protocol, you review your protocol, you look at the data points which are collected in your CRF, you have to look very carefully at those data minimization principles. based on the purpose of the study, of course, you may collect some directly identifying data or data which are indirectly identifying. Any clinical data, anyway, is considered as an identifying data and a sensitive data, in addition to that. So the 92 requirements I mentioned earlier, which are specific to our domain, they are covering those topics very clearly. In addition to that, for instance, how do you ensure that this privacy with the appropriate access segregations, with all those appropriate measures that ensure that the one who needs to know is really accessing the right data he has to know to deliver what he has to deliver. All those things are regulated by those requirements. And in addition to that, of course, you need to implement the appropriate cybersecurity measures. Are you going to use multi-factor authentication or not? Is the level of encryption measures which you have taken, are they state of the art? Are they covering all the domains where data protection needs to be protected against any intrusion initiative? So all those things are covered by the code. And this is why we mentioned several times. And this is one of the things that have been particularly well appreciated by the data protection authorities, is that we are covering the data protection per se in the context of clinical research, plus the cybersecurity measures, which are absolutely necessary to ensure that data privacy is going to be effectively implemented. These are the things which are covered by the code altogether. Yeah. And at this stage, I can say, because we see it on a daily life, that we have requirements that enable to cover all those domains, including with upcoming techniques such as decentralized clinical trials, e-consent, which are developing a lot. And we see that the measures which are described in at least the requirements with which you have to comply with, they are covering all those aspects.
But the code is still a code for processes, right? So when we speak about transparency, we speak about the duty of information, and the duty of information is with the data controllers.
Absolutely. So that's the other part. When I mentioned earlier that we have the obligations with respect to the controllers and with your sub-processors. So all these contractual relationships, they are ruled by the requirements which are specific to those domains, so that we clarify whose responsibility is, every aspect of the clinical research. I think the data protection or the data processing agreement issue is addressed with several of the requirements in the code, how it should be implemented by the parties, so that everything is clarified in terms of responsibility.
So I believe the code, like in terms of transparency, maybe less directly approach the transparency, but probably more approach the element of then how the data are to be protected, right? Because the security measures are all targeting the effective protection of data.
The code is addressing the issue of transparency from the point of view that we will have a public registry.
Yes.
The set of requirements with which you comply, they are public. The statement of applicability, which you are applying to your own company, will be made public on the public registry. So it creates a framework for transparency from that point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one very practical question. What is expected timeline for obtaining the compliance mark after submitting the application?
So this will depend first on which position your file is going to be analyzed. So that's why I'm encouraging you now to start enlisting your company in this public registry I mentioned earlier. So please visit EUCROF website and do not hesitate to contact info@eucrof.eu to get support if you have difficulties in being enlisted, and go public from the beginning, because these are the companies which are public from now that will be first analyzed on the basis of first in, first served, as I mentioned. We expect And maybe on this topic, Anastassia, you can help me, but I think we expect that the time to analyze a full dossier, at least for, of course, it will depend on the dossier. If you are applying only for one service, class of service I mentioned earlier, the dossier may be handled with shorter term. Otherwise, I think it's going to be 2-3 months before you get the answer, the final answer. Expect that there will be some additional questions for which you will have to provide additional information. 3 months seems to be, yes, the right.
Yeah. At the first level, I agree with you, because the monitoring body will meet monthly. So obviously the dossier will need to be analyzed and prepared for the meeting. As you mentioned, there might be questions in between, and then it will depend, of course, how quickly the applicant will answer those questions. The level 2, though, I believe can take more time, because level 2 requires the audit. The audit needs to be organized, conducted, etc. So I guess the level 2 can take more time. But probably the level 1 would be between 2-3 months.
Yes, I would add to that anyway, the level 1 is a mandatory step. It shows, everybody knows that this is a new measure, a new framework which is now available. So if you pass the first step now and you indicate that your intention is to go to step 2, to the level 2, then everybody will know that you're well engaged in this direction. Of course, you'll not yet be entitled to display the compliance mark for level 2, but you will be listed on the public registry with the intention to go to level 2, and you will already have the level 1 mark.
Yeah. So here there is a question which, so what best practices can CRO adopt to align with GDPR standards to enhance patient trust and data security, especially when operating in the US, where there are no federal data privacy laws? So I guess the answer would be adhere to the code, because this is the standard. Certainly it's not a US standard, but I guess if CRO is having clients operating in Europe, that applies to them, right?
Yeah, I don't see the question, so I'm not sure I've got everything about it. But
so it's a question about the best practices,
yeah,
to align with GDPR while being based in US.
Yes, GDPR implements extraterritorial, which is rules. So if you're based in the US and you have data in Europe, and or you have patients in Europe, and or you have subcontractors in Europe, then you fall into the GDPR regulation, and you have to comply with it. So from that point of view, the code is going to provide for you a solution to demonstrate your compliance. Yeah.
Definitely. So from your point of view, so that's again a question from the audience, what are the most significant barriers to adopting the code, and how can CRO overcome them?
I think that for any quality management system, any information security management system, there is an investment that needs to be done. An investment in resources, internal human resources. You need to implement appropriate SOPs, appropriate registries, technical assets, baselines, etc. So that's always the barrier with those regulations in general. I mean, I have seen how the overall, let's say, domain has evolved when I started 30 years ago. Not everybody was 9001 certified. Now almost everybody is 9001 certified, and I think that's a mandatory step forward for every service provider nowadays. What we have tried to do is to minimize the additional effort which is required, considering that ISO 9001 is already now in the everyday life of every company. If you extend that to cover also the part that has to do with GDPR and the additional cybersecurity aspects which I mentioned earlier, it's on the same kind of basis, but you have to extend it a little bit. Then you'll be in good positions to overcome all of the barriers, which are required to comply with the code. So yes, as any management system, be it for quality or information security, there is some investment that needs to be done in a company, and the investment is not just adhering to the code; is implementing the measures in your company. It's what anyway you have to do if you want really to comply with most of the vendor assessments which you are undergoing every day. So a part of this investment is going to be recovered as a return on investment, because you will have shorter delays to comply with any vendor assessment which you will have to undergo further. And in addition to that, what has been added with this code, because we've been going for a transnational code covering the 27 EU member states, if you are a larger CRO, then you'll get a return on investment on the fact that you will move on a harmonized environment throughout the whole European territory. That's also an advantage that I see on a return on investment on investing on the code. You need to see that with a return on investment. There is an initial investment to be done, for sure. The other thing is, and the last thing is, that you'll be listed in a public register. We mentioned transparency, trust, confidence. All those things you can build on those things to leverage your business.
Yeah, indeed. So I can hardly see the real barrier. It's maybe more as a difficulty, because you mentioned the element of the code. So many CROs may be kind of already compliant with most of them. I think the difficulty rather than the barrier is also to be able to provide the evidence of that. So again, it's all about documentation, and as you say, investment into the proper documentation of the compliance.
What I can witness from my everyday working activity is that this investment will help you improve your business, the way you carry your business. That's what I can witness in practice. It is an investment. Sometimes it's hard to make it clearly understood by everybody inside your company. But at the end, you will feel much more comfortable, and you will be more efficient in carrying your business. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you have to consider that as an investment with a return on investment.
And I agree. It's also, it kind of definitely will give competitive advantage, because what we see is that a lot of smaller biotechs or pharma partners, they really rely on CROs to do the job. So specifically for those who do not necessarily have their own maturity internally, for them it would be probably seen as an added value, because it provides them the guarantee that whatever CRO does will be done appropriately.
We can witness that already from the interactions we have with the other stakeholders. Yes, they are waiting for that.
Yeah. So going back to kind of our initial questions, what impact do you anticipate this code will have on the clinical research industry as a whole?
I believe, it has taken some time, but to establish. But now that it is established and approved by the UDPP and all the data protection authorities throughout Europe, I think the code is going to become the standard. We have seen that, with ISO 9001 I was mentioning earlier on. So we will have a similar path. Everybody, it's going to be a must-have, not a nice-to-have, a must-have. That's what I can see, because investigational sites, they can rely on your compliance mark. The sponsor, they will be able to rely on your compliance mark. That is going to be crucial, the way, the relationships between purchasers and vendors will be organized in the future.
Yeah, it's all about certitude, right? Like going from appropriate safeguards which is very kind of
Vague.
vague and large,
Absolutely.
to something which is quite specific and tuned to kind of not one size fits all, but something which is proportionate to the type of the services provided.
Absolutely.
How do you see the code evolving in the future?
Yes, I mentioned the code is a living material. So the code owner is EUCROF, the European CRO Federation, and we will continue to look at next releases of the code. The code will evaluate. It will have to undergo through this process of harmonization, which we already have been through for this first release. But we know that now, the data protection authorities, they know how to interact. The process has been done once. It's going to be much quicker the next time. So some of the evolutions we already mentioned there, covering 100% all what has to do with the innovations which are upcoming, such as the decentralized clinical trials or resolving definitely the issue of the data transfers, which are a real issue. These are things where the code will address. We also see upcoming, there is a very important regulation that will impact all the clinical research area in Europe. It's the European Health Data Space, where real world data will become increasingly used in a number of studies. There, the term secondary use has not to be interpreted exactly as it is for within the GDPR. It's the use of data that have been collected in the context of primary care that will also be used for the context of clinical research. At the conference in Copenhagen in February 24 next year, we will have a representative of the Commission to present all the challenges which are going to be addressed by this European Health Data Space. This is one of the domains where the code wants to evolve, certainly. And I can say already that some of the key projects which are to build this European Health Data Space are already requiring that the service providers involved first engage to be adherent to the code. I can mention one of those projects, which is Project eShare, that has made it mandatory straight away. So we see that these are domains where we will have evolutions in the coming years.
Indeed, so becoming the new standard, the new golden standard for service providers, even used in a slightly different scopes than those that we initially.
Than the initial ones, yes. We had to narrow be very focused for this version 1. It took already 7 years. We didn't want it, to expand that period.
Definitely. And then probably also, like as you mentioned, looking on how far the code in as similar as possible version can be adopted by adequate countries such as UK, so becoming even more global, and maybe looking on the transfer element.
Of course, yeah. Okay. We already discussed that with the data protection authorities, so it's on the way.
So what would be the one takeaway you would like CROs and other members of clinical research field to remember about the Code of Conduct?
Well, first of all, it's the first transnational code creating a harmonized environment throughout the 27 EU member states in the domain of clinical research and overall in the domain of health, I must say. That is why, the European Health Data Space took it as a reference document. Now, for the short term and for you as a service providers, just do not forget the system is first in, first served. If you want to adhere to the code, go to the website of EUCROF and enlist there to take a ranking position.
Okay. We have a quite interesting question. To what extent should the data protection officer be involved in the process of obtaining the compliance mark? And what specific responsibilities or contributions are expected from them during the process?
So in a company, you may have, I would say, 3 players that could be involved. Maybe the ones who are in charge of your IT infrastructure, could be your CTO, your chief technical officer, your chief compliance officer, because he has a global view of compliance, including for parts such as those which are related to ISO 27001. And ultimately, the data protection officer. For instance, what I can witness and recommend when you are establishing your adherence file, you will look at data protection impact assessments, for instance. It depends very much on the services which you are delivering. There, it is a domain where the data protection officer is going to play an essential role, for sure, in preparing your file. So it could be either for smaller entities. I would expect that the data protection officer may play the central role. In larger organizations, it's going to be probably hand in hand with the chief technical officers, your chief compliance group. It may be several people, or your chief compliance officer and the DPO. That would be my guess.
Definitely. And in the also you mentioned that CROs to prepare will need to run a gap between what they have in place and what the code require. So probably that will reveal some gaps or some elements that they will need to improve. And obviously, some of those elements will probably involve the data protection officer as well, because it will kind of modify the privacy ecosystem in place within the organization.
For instance, if you have to implement your data processing agreement or to upgrade it a little bit, that's specifically something that could be addressed primarily by the data protection officer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you spoke, another question from the audience. So you spoke about EHDS, secondary use, but how does the code address emerging technologies in clinical trials, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and decentralized trials?
Yeah, a very interesting question, and thank you for asking this question, because it is a subject which we have discussed several times with the data protection authorities. What we can say is that at this point in time, even the some of the European Medicines Agency, the UDPB, European Data Protection Board, they do not have yet all the time their own doctrine, their own policy. So they rely to a large extent on us to demonstrate to them what is going to be the good practice. What is the good thing with the code is that we have established a baseline, a minimum set of requirements, specifically those which have to do with cybersecurity I mentioned earlier, that can be reused in any context. So you have the basis to adapt to these emerging technologies or use cases, let's say, in the domain. This has been clearly understood and acknowledged by the data protection authorities. They told us this directly. It's creating the conditions to develop innovations and implement them in a better way. As at least to prepare every stakeholder adhering to the code to be to quickly, with more agility, to adhere with the new requirements that may apply in relation with those new upcoming technologies, in particular AI. That is why I mentioned secondary use of data in the context in relation with primary use, which is for care, not in the context of controller-processor relationship. Because this is a huge domain which is coming in front of us and in the next years, for which we already have a lot of demands, by the way, for which we will demonstrate a number of use cases at the conference in Copenhagen next February, and for which there will be a call for candidates to have pilot cases. So we are working hand in hand with the authorities to create the conditions of the next step, including in these domains. I will not here in 1 second give all the answers. It requires more more discussion to explain how all those things will be done. But we have those things in mind with the code. The code will accompany those things as they evolve.
I agree, and it's not the place and the remit of the code to clarify the very notion of secondary use, which I agree. There are a lot of amalgams because, like, the secondary use is generalized, and in GDPR we have the actually direct collection and indirect collection, and not every indirect collection is a secondary use. So I think once the notion will be clarified, there will be definitely room for the code to step into some of that space by putting at the disposal of those protagonists the controls and the very kind of solid safeguards in place.
And that is why, Anastassia, just to maybe provide a complementary information, the code has a code owner and has an independent monitoring body.
Yeah.
That's very important to understand. The role of having the code evolving and adhering to new use cases is the role of the code owner. And EUCROF will maintain an effort in this domain and is maintaining an effort by participating to a number of European scale projects for this purpose. The monitoring body will be in charge of, with the current conditions in the code, providing the monitoring marks, the compliance marks to the service providers, and making all decisions in relation with compliance, with adherence with the code. That's the role of the monitoring body. Of course, they also will be involved in some improvements of the code because they will have the feedback of real practice, of adhering FICE, trying to simplify procedures, whatever is needed to make things, life easier for everybody. And they will contribute from that point of view too. But the primary goal is in an independent and impartial way to deliver the compliance marks to the adherents, and or to remove the compliance marks if there are good reasons for that.
Yeah. So, but decentralized trials. So here specifically, I believe code already have solutions in place because there is one specific type of the services which is kind of useful for decentralized trials and closer to the needs of decentralized clients.
Yeah, for sure, but still, and this has been debated with data protection authorities, we know that there are some misalignment between some national regulations still in this domain. For instance, electronic consent is not applied everywhere in the same way in Europe. So we have exercised, we have been through this harmonization process with the code that has obliged the various countries to harmonize their positions around the code. We will continue in this direction to create a harmonized landscape, including on those subjects. They may take some time, however.
Yeah.
So what we have said is that if you comply with the code, you have all the conditions to easily adjust or adapt with the regulations of every country which is allowing the usage of electronic consent. Now, we think so. Now, but however, there may be still some places in Europe where electronic consent will not be accepted, at least in some cases. So we still have to play with the national regulations from that point of view, for all those things which are not covered yet 100% by the code, and the transnational regulations such as GDPR, which is applied.
Thank you a lot, Yoani. I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you a lot for our audience for asking very interesting questions. So please visit EUCROF website. The code is there. Line up. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite you on our next event live, our summit on 23rd of January in Brussels, if you want to hear more about different topics in this sector. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day.
Thank you very much to everybody.